Welcome to the workshop. Today's workshop is called Sleep Well, and it's the second one in a series. The first one was called Eat Well, about how to eat the best possible diet for you. So yes, to me, one has to get the basics right in terms of setting the groundwork, and eating to me is a basic, and sleeping for me is another basic. And so these are what I would call your basic elements of a healthy lifestyle. So what are the goals of the workshop? I'd like to try and help you to gain insight into how your daytime habits really impact the ability for you to sleep well at night. And I'll go into specifically which habits I believe to be the most impactful, both positive and negative. And then also go a little bit into how your biochemistry is also involved in setting the scene for good sleep. So, sleep is a really big topic. Biochemistry is huge, and I'm basically just going to hone in on a couple of points. So if you can just appreciate that the subject is a lot bigger, but basically simplifying and just bringing out what I think are the most essential elements to begin with anyway. And then, yes, timing. I really think that people underestimate the impact of appropriate timing with a healthy body clock and a healthy sleep-wake cycle. The theme that the workshop will bring up would be the circadian rhythm, stress hormones and the impact of stress, and then sleep hygiene, which basically is the guideline as to how do you set the scene for good, restful and sufficient sleep, so that you can function the next day and you can basically be healthy. So let me start with my sleep story. I was always someone who enjoyed sleeping and never had a problem with sleeping until the birth of my first child. So this was 18 years ago, but it was a real, I had a baby that just didn't sleep. And so for 3.5 years, we had broken sleep. And so I really had to obviously work with the elements that I could work with. And that's what also introduced me to this whole to sleep hygiene. So in my case, I had an unsettled child, and so even if I wanted to sleep, I couldn't sleep. And then what happened was, at some point she did start sleeping, and I still couldn't I couldn't sleep. So I basically had to become aware of how to help my nervous system calm down and behave appropriately, and what were the little sort of hacks and that I could use to help my nervous system recover. So this was 18 years ago, and yeah, my sleep pattern these days is generally good, but it is something that if I get stressed, I will immediately start to not sleep as well. So I'll share more as I go through as to how what I do for myself and for my clients, and so hopefully it will become clearer as I move through. So we all know sleep is important. We all know what it's like, how we feel when we don't sleep, and how you can't function, and it just reduces your quality of life. So that's obviously, those are the obvious benefits of good sleep. But people might not know that poor sleep is also linked to a higher body weight. So there are also risks that go along with people that sleep poorly. And so the risks of heart disease, stroke, and type 2 diabetes are there. And poor sleep is also linked to depression and increased inflammation. So to me, those are the motivations for getting solutions, to improving, if you do have a sleep issue, to improving it, because these are modifiable risks. Good sleepers tend to eat fewer calories, and good sleepers have a strong immune system. I think shift workers, there have been studies that show that people that work shifts have higher incidences of cancer, and so that really speaks to the relationship between your body clock and your immune system. Yes, good sleep helps you to concentrate and be more productive, and it can also maximize athletic performance. So something I uncovered only fairly recently is the importance of sleep in the brain getting its nightly cleanse. So the brain is composed of many nerve cells called neurons, and there are certain neurons that are involved with mopping up. And so these are your glial cells or glial cells, and they form basically the brain's equivalent of the lymphatic system, and it is called the glymphatic system. So when you sleep, your brain is cleansed by the glymphatic system, and so that is another sort of positive spin-off for good sleep, and it can also be something which can contribute to the development of neurological issues. Is if you don't rest, then your brain isn't able to clean itself nightly as efficiently as it would need to. So there are many problems around sleep, and what I like to do is essentially each challenge may well have a unique solution. So difficulty falling asleep will require a different solution, for instance, to people that, for instance, can't stay asleep or wake at night or wake too early in the morning. So, all of these different types of nightly disturbances generally have a slightly, they have a different underlying cause. We also have problems with feeling unrefreshed, having slept but not feeling refreshed, and obviously daytime fatigue would be a side effect of not getting sufficient deep rest. So these essentially are how I see the major sleep problems, just put very, very simply. And that brings me to our first theme. And for those of you that know me and know a little bit of what interests me, I'm really, coming from South Africa, used to living more in touch with nature, and so I really I feel strongly that we are very much connected to our environment and the natural world out there, and our health is connected to living in alignment with our environment. So the circadian rhythm is basically your internal body clock, and it is impacted by things that go on outside. So it's a body clock, and it regulates your sleep-wake cycle. It repeats itself roughly every 24 hours, and it's impacted by the environment. So this is just a little graphic just to kind of give you an idea of what's happening at certain times of the day on an internal level, on a physiological level, on an almost automatic level. We don't have to think about it. It just the body just does its thing. So a lot of what I recommend is going to be based on trying to live in alignment with the body clock, our body clock, and our environment and what's happening outside. And so the first important point would be bringing up the impact of light and dark. So light and dark, it's very obvious. We know that that impacts our ability to sleep. And so when light touches our eyes, basically we produce more serotonin, and in response to darkness, we produce melatonin. So, you know, there's a hormonal response to the circadian rhythm and the exposure to both light and darkness. So I'll talk a little bit more about that. But essentially, when we're looking at sleep regulation, we may well need to look at the factors that impact melatonin production and the factors that impact serotonin production. So something that is not reflected on this picture is also the impact of cortisol, which is your stress hormone, which is also involved with waking you up. So I would say that there's actually 3 hormonal triggers that I believe to be the biggest players with regulating a healthy sleep-wake cycle. So we'll talk more about each one of those. So yes, melatonin is produced by your pineal gland in your brain, and it is a hormone that induces sleep in response to darkness. So blue light exposure actually suppresses melatonin production. And so we'll talk about where the sources of blue light come from, not just sunlight and, you know, looking at a blue sky, but all the artificial sources which play a role in our modern world and can really play havoc with melatonin production and sleep. So melatonin is a peptide hormone and a neurotransmitter, and it is related to serotonin in that serotonin is the precursor. So you need good levels of serotonin to make enough melatonin. And sometimes that is where a problem can be for people. So especially if you do suffer from depression, or if you have used the SSRIs, the serotonin reuptake inhibitor medications for a long period of time, that could be an area that you need to look at in terms of improving your sleep. So melatonin is also an antioxidant, so it has other benefits besides sleep. It helps to enhance your immune system. I'm not sure if people out there have followed that melatonin is recommended in COVID. It has antiviral properties. So yes, melatonin is more than just a sleep hormone. It's a potent antioxidant, and it really helps to boost your immune system. Melatonin is also made in the gut, and so it even affects your digestive system, especially your gallbladder, and so it really also supports gallbladder activity. So yes, melatonin is more than just a sleep hormone. So if melatonin is suppressed by the exposure to blue light, then we don't have enough of the hormone for us to feel sleepy, and sleep is not adequately induced. So blue light is coming from all sorts of both natural and artificial sources. Our screens, our telephones, our cell phones, so TV, anything with a blue or strong backlight, the eye and the brain perceives as a blue light, and it basically sends the message to the brain that it's not time to sleep. All right, the first theme was the circadian rhythm. The second theme is relates to stress, and we all know that stress, in fact, impacts our ability to sleep, and that is basically because our nervous systems are impacted. And when we feel stressed, our sympathetic nervous system is activated, so that's the part on the right. And so your sympathetic nervous system is involved with the fight, flight, and fright response, and it's involved with all these activities below. And then its counterpart is the parasympathetic nervous system, and that is more of a rest and digest function to the nervous system. And we need both, and we need them both to be reacting appropriately. But inappropriate sympathetic nervous system activation will definitely impact your ability to sleep well. So yes, if we feel stressed, then the sympathetic nervous system is activated, and it acts on your adrenal glands, which produce your stress hormones. And the main stress hormone that I'm going to focus on here is cortisol, mainly because we have such a thing as a cortisol awakening response. And this is something that can be measured. And it's basically will tell us the appropriateness. So for instance, if you can't wake up in the morning, usually you have a sluggish cortisol awakening response. If you wake up too early, then you basically have an overactive cortisol awakening response. And usually that is as a result of this high sympathetic tone that you live with, perhaps unconsciously, during the day. So yes, we have this, we have our nervous systems that are involved with activating the stress hormones, and we obviously want here appropriate activation at appropriate times. So people that have very low cortisol function, they struggle to wake up in the morning. So either way, we need these hormones to be acting appropriately at the right times. So our adrenal glands, basically you can just see that in this day and age, they are bombarded, and there can be many triggers that serve to promote an overactive adrenal function or an inappropriate adrenal activation. And that means that we're producing these stress hormones without knowing it, and possibly inappropriately. So you can see, maybe you can go through and look at all the boxes and just see how many boxes you could tick there. The obvious ones are, the stress, the emotional stress, the financial stress, the loss, those type of things, but also things like allergies and toxins and caffeine and coffee, lack of exercise, poor eating habits. Those also have the ability to trigger a stress response, especially if it's habitual behavior. So sometimes one has to look at the whole body in order to solve a sleep issue. Look at the whole body, look at what's happening with the adrenals and where are the stresses coming from. And if you have food allergies, it might be that solving your food allergies actually help your adrenal and your immune system, and impact the rest of your body and your sleep. So that just speaks to the holistic nature of how I work, but also how sometimes, especially when you have to solve a chronic sleep issue, one needs to look at the whole picture. Stimulant. Okay, so stimulants, things like tea, coffee, chocolate, energy drinks, anything with caffeine or caffeine-like substances have the ability to wind you up when you should be winding down. So they can increase the production of stress hormones. They also can disorder your blood sugar, and even people that metabolize caffeine fast. So these are the people that can drink coffee at night but feel no effects. Even people that are fast metabolizers of caffeine should reduce their caffeine intake and to promote sleep. I am someone who is a very slow metabolizer of caffeine, so it means that the coffee that I have at midday sometimes can prevent me from falling asleep at like 10 o'clock at night. So there are people that are both fast and slow metabolizers of caffeine, and this can be the reason why you either get the jitters or can't drink coffee and tea at bedtime, or whether you're able to do that. Alcohol is another trigger, which people often can have a nightcap and fall asleep, which easily, but essentially the benefits of alcohol and sleep are short-lived. So usually that is followed by an early waking to use the bathroom or for other reasons. So reducing alcohol or avoiding alcohol if you have a sleep problem is another recommendation. And then, this concept of sleep hygiene is, how do we set the scene? How do we, and I'm going to go through, essentially the recommendations for setting the scene for good sleep. So in this case, setting the scene is really switching off the screens, not switching on the screens. So just to clarify the picture. So we need to look at your environment in your bedroom. The room temperature needs to be around 18 degrees. Okay, so 18 degrees is optimal. You don't want to be too warm. You don't want to be too cold. I haven't mentioned there that there should be some sort of ventilation, so a window open a crack or something like that is also good, or at least having good ventilation. And then it's advisable to have a regular bedtime and a regular morning waking time. So essentially going to bed more or less at the same time each night and waking up, more or less at the same time every morning, within, I would say, 30 to 60 minutes of variation. So having that kind of routine and regularity really does also assist your body's circadian rhythm. And then, when it comes to timing, a lot of people say to me, and especially now because we have, these long summer days that are starting, where it's late until really, quite late. I mean, it's light until quite late. Most of us get our deepest sleep before midnight. So if you're not getting to bed before midnight, then the chances are you probably aren't getting as much deep rest as you could and as your body needs. And it's in that deep rest phase of sleep that we really get the most health benefits. All those benefits I mentioned before happen during deep sleep. Yeah, so that's the motivation to getting into bed early, before midnight. Importantly, one needs to dim the lights and start switching off screens 1 to 2 hours before your bedtime, and to have a relaxing evening ritual. So I'll go into more detail with those things there. There's quite a lot one can do with food and supplementation, but it really depends on, if I go back to that, the problem, it really depends on where does your problem lie. Do you struggle to fall asleep? Do you struggle to stay asleep? When do you wake, for instance? And, what is, how do you feel when you wake up in the morning? So depending on what your problem is, one can support it with a particular protocol of supplementation and dietary suggestions. So if one needs to induce sleep, then obviously melatonin is an obvious choice. Most people don't know that there are certain foods that are also rich in melatonin. So I would recommend that if you can't fall asleep easily, then you need to pay attention to the blue light exposure, as well as possibly looking at supplementing with melatonin in supplemental form and eating melatonin-rich foods. So the foods there, I've just mentioned 3: cherries, oats, and dairy milk. If you struggle to fall asleep, then your sedative minerals like calcium and magnesium also play a role. And it might be that maybe that's especially if you have sufficient melatonin, and that can actually be tested as well. So if one knows that melatonin levels are normal, or if, for instance, you take melatonin and you feel quite drugged, then I would say that that's one way of knowing that you don't need melatonin. Perhaps you need to focus more on supporting the nervous system, and that's where your sedating minerals like calcium and magnesium can be helpful to take at bedtime or within half an hour or an hour of your bedtime. And then it's also really important to look at your protein intake, because when protein is digested, it metabolizes down to amino acids, and amino acids are the building blocks for many of our neurotransmitters. So I'm sure people know and have heard of 5-HTP or tryptophan being a building block of serotonin, the hormone, the happy hormone, which is also a precursor to melatonin. So supplementing, firstly, having sufficient protein in your diet is the starting point. And then secondly, looking at whether supplementing with 5-HTP is relevant, or any of the other amino acids like taurine or L-theanine. Those are specifically related to helping with, let's say you fall asleep easily, but you wake an hour or two later. Often we need to look at what's happening in the brain with other neurotransmitters, and like glycine, for instance. And so you have taurine and L-theanine, which can help in that instance. And of course, your tryptophan-rich foods are seafood, chicken, seeds, nuts. So getting sufficient protein in your diet during the day will also help you too. And then also making sure you're digesting your proteins. So sometimes people have stomach issues where they don't have enough acid, or too much acid or inappropriate acid production. And so protein digestion can be impacted. And you can see how, one can start off with a problem that is in the gut, like not digesting protein, and end up with a problem like not being able to stay asleep because you don't have those individual neurotransmitters to feed the sedating neurotransmitters in the brain. And so that's how, in a very simplistic way, that's how even gut health helps sleep quality. And then in terms of supplementing, or in terms of looking at what can you take to help your sleep, there obviously are many calming herbs, and I'm just mentioning a few here: chamomile, valerian, and lavender. And so these herbs can be used in the form of an essential oil, which you can sort of use in a diffuser in your room. You can also drink teas that are based on these herbs. Valerian is a lot more sedating, and that can also be used as if someone really needs sedation. Also, there are other classes of herbs that are not purely calming, they're more adaptogens, and so they help your body adapt to stress. They work more on the adrenals, and they work more on sort of not just calming the adrenals, but helping the adrenals react appropriately. So, for instance, if someone feels tired and wired, then you don't want to give them a calming product, because they are tired. They don't need to be calmed. They need more of an adaptogen. And so something like ashwagandha, and there are lots of Ayurvedic herbs and other products that fall into this, like the medicinal mushrooms, that fall into that category, that might be more appropriate than just giving something to kind of knock a person out. Right, so this is what I call a sleep hygiene checklist. I can give everybody this slide. In fact, everybody will have access to the recording if that's what if they would like to rewatch things. But if they would just like the checklist, then I will send that separately as well. So basically, this is how I would approach, finding solutions and to your sleep issue. So first, it starts during the day, and during the day you would like to get as much safe sun exposure as possible because it's appropriate. So during the day when the sun's shining, we go outside and we soak up the sun, and especially blue light in our eyes during the daytime helps to produce serotonin, so we feel happy, and that's, I think, what most of us want. So appropriate light exposure is a very important piece here, and that involves getting enough sun during the day and then getting exposure to darkness at an appropriate time later on. Then you want to avoid stimulants from about 2 o'clock, and these are, even if you're the kind of person that can have a cup of coffee at bed and feel like there's no impact, even those people, if your sleep is disturbed, there is a cascade of events that goes down with metabolizing caffeine, and it definitely can impact on more subtle ways. Avoid evening exercise. Exercise is kind of a stimulant too, so obviously we do want appropriate movement and appropriate exercise, because that helps with stress relief, but evening workouts are going to delay your ability to fall asleep. Your last meal or snack should be by 8 o'clock. There are other risks around eating late, insulin resistance, metabolic syndrome, those types of illnesses are linked to nighttime eating, and so it's more than just impacting your sleep, it impacts your whole physiology if you eat late at night. The only exception to that is that if you are perimenopausal or menopausal, and if you're having flushes at night that's waking you, I would say that it would be appropriate to have a small snack around that time, like an apple and a handful of nuts, for instance, not sort of a chocolate brownie and a cup of tea. So, either herbal tea with sort of a small amount of fruit and nuts would be appropriate. But otherwise, to me, that's the only exception with regards to late eating. And then you want to start a wind down, and that kind of wind down will look different for all of us, but the common denominator is that it needs to be a screenless wind down, so from at least 9 o'clock. Some people need to start winding down a bit earlier, but yeah, at least around, give yourself an hour. Avoid alcohol, we've mentioned that before. And something I quite like is to go for a walk and watch the sunset, and that really, it's not that I do it every night, but that really combines, it's a nice evening ritual. It combines a bit of movement, gentle walking, exposure to nature, and then also my eyes will start to react to the diminishing light, and that also starts to set the scene for the melatonin production. So I'm just going to skip to the darken the room. So while we're still on the light theme, it really is worthwhile to invest in some sort of blockout. So whether you have blockout blinds, or whether you don't really want to invest in that at the moment, at least an eye patch, which can provide a complete blockout. And that's blockout from the street light outside your window, the sunshine, which, because the sun hasn't gone down yet, and also all the electronics in your room that might have a light flashing, a charger or whatever, all these electronic devices that we do have nearby. Those lights as well can impact your production of melatonin. I also like to acknowledge the effect of electromagnetic frequencies on our nervous system per se. So, for instance, just make a mental note on where your Wi-Fi box is. And if it's right next to your bed, then perhaps move it or move your bed. We used to have that in one of our old houses. The Wi-Fi box was right next to, on the other side of the wall to my son's bedroom. And so what we ended up doing was actually switching the Wi-Fi off at night. So, there are all sorts of solutions, but sometimes that can play a role, especially with really sensitive people, is the electromagnetic frequencies from electronics, from Wi-Fi, all of those types of things. Ideally, you want to switch off at night, in your room, that is. Avoid stressful conversations at night. That's one surefire way to kind of get your heart rate up and, talk about whatever, get into a fight or talk about something stressful. So those kind of discussions one can choose another time. Have a warm bath or a shower, and then listen to music or read. So, and read, a normal paperback, so a normal book. I know some of the Kindle books, you can actually switch the backlight off, and you can also, use gadgets. And so there are lots of sleep hygiene gadgets, and one of them is to use a red light filter, which can either be in the form of something that you have, a filter that you have on your light bulbs. I know the Philips lights you can program to red, so that's something that you can do, is to use a red light filter, or even you get the red light glasses, which also block inappropriate blue light exposure. So one can still, if you have to, work online, but then you take steps to reduce the blue light exposure by switching off the backlights, by using red light filters. So those gadgets make it possible to use screens later, but one needs to experiment with them. Weighted blankets, I don't have experience with that, but some people with restless legs and some people that have sleep issues can benefit from weighted blankets. Binaural beats are you can look at Spotify and just search binaural beats. They are basically subliminal wavelengths that are combined with nature sounds, or like rain or ocean sounds, or there's so much available, and those can also help with brainwave tuning to get us into a theta brainwave state. So that can also be useful. Just listening to music is absolutely fine, but if you need to take it one step further, then the binaural beats are useful. And then I use a sleep tracker. So it's a ring called an Aura ring, and it really has helped me gain insight into my sleep pattern. And so it might be that some of you might be at the point where you need to know more and you would like to track your sleep, and you need something concrete to work with. So it has helped me to understand my ideal sleep quality. So here you can see it will tell me how long I've been in deep rest for, the light sleep, the REM sleep, the awake states. It definitely helps you to pick up patterning. So I've had, for instance, evenings where I've slept absolutely shockingly, and I put it down to the glass of red wine I had during the day, or you know, the late meal that, because we were, you know, socializing with friends. So it really helps you very, very sensitively pick up these triggers for you. And it uses heart rate variability, and it's very unobtrusive, or so it's not like an Apple Watch where you've got a lot of electromagnetic frequency on your wrist while you sleep. It's very inobtrusive. So the sleep tracking is another tool that you can consider if you really feel like you need to understand your sleep pattern a bit deeper. And then I also like to test hormones. Sometimes, you know, there's just too much guesswork when it comes to sleep, and so one can actually do salivary tests where you check your cortisol function, and it's done a couple of samples over a 24-hour period, and you can see. So if you look at this here, the red graph is the highest normal range, and the blue is the lowest normal range. So this is your cortisol, salivary cortisol levels. And if we look at this green range, this is the typical insomniac adrenal fatigue pattern, where you can see this person is having a cortisol spike at midnight. And so no wonder they can't sleep. And so these can be very useful patterns to confirm, you know, what is actually happening. So this person's circadian rhythm is completely upside down, and so then, you know, it gives you black and white feedback as to, okay, this is the reason, and now this is how we go about fixing it. So I like to say test, don't guess. And then another thing that one can do is to actually check your melatonin levels. And this test also does cortisol. So there are many cases where people are taking melatonin or are considering to take melatonin, and maybe they've taken it and it's not affecting them very positively, or it has no effect, and it's because they have sufficient melatonin. The problem is not related to melatonin. So yeah, this is called the Dutch test. It's not a Dutch test. It stands for the dried urine. What's it stand for now? Dried urine complex hormone analysis. I can't remember, but it's essentially quite a broad test, and it's dried urine test. So, okay, we're coming to the end of the workshop, and I'd like to just everyone to sort of have a think about what single action you could take that might make the biggest positive impact on your sleep. It might be that, you know, one needs to do a few things, but think of one thing that I maybe have mentioned that was either new for you or that resonated with you. So just now we will open up all the mics, and you know, people can ask questions or volunteer anything that they feel might be useful or relevant to others. So thank you for your participation. If you want to reach out to me, feel free to either send me an email. I also do a free 15-minute meet and greet chat if you want to chat with me just one-on-one, to see if I can help you. I also have a Facebook community group which is focused on healthy lifestyle, and yes, I also have a newsletter which you can sign up for if you like what I share. That's me. I'm on just about all the social media channels, so reach out to me. My brand is Wellness Place International, so that's the name that I use on social media. So I'd love to connect.